Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. The first item on the work session is the fiscal year 18 comprehensive annual financial report. Michelle, Director of Finance, and Chris Lehman from SB and Company.
Good evening.
Good evening.
It's hard to believe, but calendar year is coming to a close. We're starting to gear up for our fiscal year 20 budget, and so our auditors from SB and Company, Chris Lehman, is here this evening just to cover everything that was reviewed and our final audited numbers for fiscal year 18, which ended June 30 of 2018. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Chris.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'll go through this kind of high level. If you have any questions, just please stop me. You've got the handout in front of you as well as on the screen here. Starting on slide 6, we were engaged to perform the audit of the June 30, 2018 financial statements of the city. We're also engaged to complete the Uniform Guidance Single Audit. That's an audit of the federal funds that are spent by the city. That's an annually mandated audit by the federal government. We also reviewed the Uniform Financial Report, which is a report that's required to be submitted to the state upon submission or completion of the annual financial statement, and that has been done. As well as we assist and review the data collection form, which is filed with the federal government upon completion of the single audit. And we're still in the process of completing that process, but there's still plenty of time from a deadline perspective to be on time for that. The next slide just shows a high-level summary of the results. We've issued an unmodified opinion on the financial statements. That would be the best opinion we can give under professional standards that says that the financial statements are reasonably free of material misstatement. We didn't discover any instances of fraud. A financial statement audit is not a fraud-specific audit, but we are required to have a healthy skepticism that fraud could be perpetrated by anyone at any time. We didn't have any material weaknesses in the internal controls. You'll see, and I'll walk through the numbers in a couple slides, but you'll see on an entity-wide basis, there's a positive change in net position of roughly $4.5 million for the year. That includes all business-type activities as well as governmental activities. We didn't have any audit entries posted through the audit process, so that just speaks to the quality of the general ledger and the system throughout the year. The biggest change from an audit perspective was the implementation of GASB 75, it's a change in how the OPEB liability, formerly the net OPEB obligation, has been calculated. The way it's been required to be calculated has resulted in a restatement of that balance within the financial statements, and I have a slide highlighting that coming up here shortly. Slide 9 just shows a picture of our risk-based audit approach. As part of our audit approach, we go through and we look at the internal control environment, and we're really looking at what are the factors that affect the financial statements. The environments, the areas around the environment also include risk assessment, information and communication, control activities, and monitoring. In each of these cases, we concluded that the environment was effective for the period under audit. On slide 11 starts our evaluation of the key processes. We look at the treasury and the bank reconciliation process, estimates within the financial statements, the financial reporting and closing process, as well as the expenditure cycle. And in all areas, we concluded that the area was effective for the period under audit. And then on the next slide, payroll, revenue, and fixed assets, we also concluded was operating effectively during the audit period. Questions so far? Just at a high level, and again, this is the entity-wide, representative of the entity-wide financial statements. That includes governmental activities and business-type activities. Total assets of the governmental activities was at roughly $114 million for the year. On the business type activity side, it was at 241 million. The majority of those items are, capital assets that are capitalized and depreciated over their useful lives. Deferred inflows and outflows, those balances relate mostly to pension and OPEB-related activity. You'll see on the liability side, the governmental activities ended at $89 million of liabilities, and the business activities at $75 million. That leaves a total net position for the governmental activities of $28 million, compared to $166 million for the business type activities. On the statement of activities, total revenues for the governmental activities was at $46 million for the end of fiscal year 18. That compares to expenses of $46 million. On the business type activity side, revenues were at $52 million compared to expenses of roughly $48 million for the year. The next slide, 16, just highlights the effect of the change in the OPEB accounting. And if you're familiar with the changes in pension a few years ago, the OPEB standards following that change the same way, but that's resulted in a restatement of net position for a negative roughly $31 million for recording the net OPEB liability. At the end of June 30, 2018, the liability on the financial statements was at $24 million.
And the big change there, so when we keep saying OPEB, we're talking about other post-employment benefits, which is our retiree health and dental insurance. And for the city of Hagerstown, prior to our fiscal year 18 financial statements, we were one of few who had actually been contributing into the separate fund to help, fund our future obligations. So in fiscal year 17, we actually were fortunate enough that we had a prepaid. We had funded more. We funded all of our retiree actual claims, plus we had put a sufficient balance of almost $2 million we had sitting in a prepaid. We went from that on fiscal year 17 to showing a liability because the future obligations of what our retiree health insurance costs are in the millions of dollars. So many more millions than what we currently have in our health insurance trust fund,
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor.
And we
You see
audit,
him looking at me like that, right?
I mean, we audit dozens of governments, and I can count on probably one hand how many had a prepaid prior to the change in the accounting standard. So it's fairly rare. Of course, the accounting standard change that puts you in the liability position, but it's not as bad as you see at other places. So,
But it is one of the reasons for the big changes in that a couple screens ago when you looked at citywide and you looked at assets from 2018 to 17 and 16, and the reason for the big change in the unrestricted fund balance for governmental funds now being at a negative 48 million.
mm-hmm. The remaining part, I won't read through each one of these, but this would be either firm or industry required communications to the council. You know, if we had difficulties getting through the audit or disagreements with management, if we had found fraud or things of that nature, we'd be required to bring that to your attention through our process. And we don't have anything of a negative nature we'd be required to bring to your attention through the audit process. I've also included my contact information in the back, as well as our second partner on the engagement. That way, if something does happen during the year that you want to reach out to me directly, I make myself available. Michelle already knows how to reach me if there's accounting-related items, but if there's anything that I could be a resource outside of the one time I come here a year, you've got my contact information. Any questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry, did I miss that? Did we phase that in when you see the unrestricted from 2016 to 2018? Obviously, the drop, so to speak, nearly doubles.
Right, so first was the drop originally happened when the pension portion had to
Okay.
be completed. So if we actually had, so slide 14 that he's referring to, if we had 4 years here and we actually showed 2015, prior to that, the unrestricted fund balance, or actually the terminology that's used is net position, prior to that wasn't this big negative, but when we made the change to record and implement the GASB with both our police and fire pension, as well as our Maryland state pension liabilities, that's when the first drop occurred. So that negative 24 million to negative 26 million. So 16 to 17 really from an asset level and liability level and also net position level looks fairly constant, like nothing too huge. But then the difference between there to 18, when we go from 64 million to 70 million to 89 or 90 million in liabilities over a 3-year period, is recording that extra big balance for our liability now that we have to record for the health insurance. And again, we're looking at just the governmental side. We also recorded that same liabilities on the business type.
So the number then next year should be that plus whatever the natural progression of growth is
Right.
in that unfunded liability
Right.
for both of those GASB requirements as
Right.
reflected in the bottom line,
Yes.
correct?
Correct.
So next year it might be 51,
Yes.
because now you've accounted for both.
Yes.
Yes.
And 51 is a paper number aside from, or in contrast to what you actually have on hand during that sort of end-of-the-year snapshot in time.
Yeah, it's basically a big estimate
All right,
compared to whatever the
right,
fiduciary assets have been saved to date.
at that moment.
At that moment in time.
You're never gonna pay that at
So
that
it's-
moment. Yeah.
Right, so it's not something you
Well-
owe today, it's just over time. It's an unfunded liability that you've got years and years to
Right.
pay.
And the goal would be that, our percentage that's unfunded would shrink the more that we're able to
Over
fund.
time.
But the reality, of course, is not that. That hasn't been happening over the
Well,
last.
no, you're not gonna be able to put back more
Please.
than what the growth is occurring. That's why I asked that question.
Right.
Point do you limit how much it's gonna grow?
Okay, that's all I had.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, thank you.
I'm gonna have Jennifer switch places with Chris. And we just thought that, with us being in calendar December, with reviewing, high level our CAFR, and also in preparing for fiscal year 20 budget, that we wanted to take an opportunity, as well to cover a couple of things. We actually had a handout, and it was included in the packet, and it was on the website as of Friday. The first thing that we did was some pie charts, just high level. We tend to, in the CAFR, and with a lot of the things that we did with Chris earlier, talk about it in sections. Governmental activities versus business type. Governmental activities are just all of the funds that get the majority of the funding from taxpayers. It's our general fund, it's our CIP fund, it's our economic redevelopment fund, which is where our economic incentives are paid from. It also includes CDBG. And then, of course, on the other side of that is the business type funds. And just as a reminder, our business type funds are the electric, water, wastewater, parking, property management, and golf. So the slides that we put in here is just repetitive of some of the information that's in the CAFR. Just again, just to do it in a chart format, to do high level. Fiscal year 18 governmental revenue, 63% of our total revenue came from property taxes. Again, this isn't new. When you look at just a general fund, that percentage is a little higher. It's about 67 or 68%. Again, that percent has not really changed year over year over year. But again, the largest component, the next largest component is income and other taxes, what was formerly once referred to as state shared revenues. And a lot of the state shared revenues is income tax, state aid for police protection, state aid for fire protection, hotel motel tax, and that is roughly about 11% of the revenue. Those are the two biggest portions. The expenditures, when we break that down and look at it by different categories, much like we look at it in the budget side, 56% of all of the expenditures on the governmental activities, and again, this includes all the other funds, so 56% is spent in public safety. The next highest level is in general governmental, and remembering that that general governmental does include not just general fund, general governmental activity, but also CDBG, economic incentives and such. I'm going to flip the chart. The next page is just the graphs never look quite as nice as they do for business type because the majority of all the revenue is charges for services, because that's what you do. Whatever you're going to provide, you incorporate it, you come up with a rate structure, and you charge those fees to your customers that are utilizing that service. So charges for services, that revenue was 93% of all business type activity revenue for the year. And then we show separately just a little comparison so that you can see revenue versus expenses for the three largest individual funds, electric, water, wastewater, and then the really small one there off to the side would include, the other includes golf, property management, and parking. Next, just to talk about the three largest things, three largest obligations that the city has to record and show. And those are, we briefly mentioned those when Chris was up here. The police and fire pension, we just wanted to put the numbers here. Everything is included in the CAFR, but again, the police and fire pension, our unfunded liability for that at June 30 was $33.8 million. That is 100% in the general fund and on the governmental side. We don't have any of that is not applicable to business type activities or employees. Yes.
Can you tell me what the others includes again?
Golf,
Okay.
parking, and property management.
What about trash service?
Trash service is billed as part of the general fund. So it's in revenue,
Even though you collect,
yes.
even though we collect basically a utility bill for trash
Yes, it's
with the
within our,
utility bill,
it's part of our general
we
fund.
log it in the general fund activity?
Yes, and as well as the expenses as well.
Is there a reason that we do that?
It's been done that way forever. I mean, we could make it a separate fund and make it its own fund.
No, I'm just curious. I would expect it to function like a business activity.
If we move forward with stormwater, we would probably end up showing electric, water, wastewater, and stormwater, all four of them separate, and then leave the other three lumped together. The other
It's still odd that we don't show trash that way.
trash that way.
I mean, we treat that,
Is it right in the
That's-
general fund, right
but
under?
I mean, we treat it like any other thing. I mean, it's a
Yes,
fee for service.
yes, and we do add that on our quarterly statements that go out with the utility billing.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense. Go ahead.
Police and fire pension, as I mentioned, $33.8 million in liabilities. And again, if those liabilities are higher than what we have in that pension plan, it also makes our unrestricted fund balance smaller and smaller. The percentage, of the total pension liability, so the funded thing was 38.37%. Maryland State Retirement and Pension System, the cost here, the unfunded liability is $17.7 million, but that cost is split between the governmental employees as well as the business type, and actually, I think the split ended up being 49% to 51%. So 49% of that $17.7 million also is reflected within the governmental activities share. The city's portion of the total state plan, you can see is 0.082%. We get that information directly from the state of Maryland. We contributed 1.7 million for fiscal year 18. And I think oftentimes people get confused or ask us questions. So the state of Maryland, every single year, provides information, and they mandate what the employee percent of salaries are going to be that get put there. And it has remained unchanged, I think, since 2011. It went from 5% to 7%. In addition to that, every single year, they mandate what the employer share is also going to be contributed. And we always fund that at 100%. But again, it's nothing that we have any control over. It's something that's mandated. And those percentages do change every single year. The last bullet was just on OPEB. So again, you could see 24.2 million was unfunded at the end of the year in our liability there. Our funded percentage is only 29%. So even though we've been ahead of the game, and we've been saying that all along because we pay 100% of all the claims for all the retiree, above and beyond, we put a contribution of $650,000 annually into a separate pension plan. We're still not even at 40% funded at this point. Next, just talk about the general fund a little bit. I know that this has been a topic that the mayor has been anxious to see. Budget to actual, so just the general fund. Now, when we talk about the general fund, it's a governmental fund. And when we talk about general fund, it excludes pension expense and it excludes OPEB expense. So when we look at these numbers, this is before those other big liabilities that we have recorded on our books. Total revenue for the general fund in fiscal year 18 was at 43.5 million. Our total expense at 42.3. So when we look at just the general fund, we ended at about 1.1 or a $1.2 million surplus. We had a beginning fund balance of 10.4, an ending fund balance of 11.6. Our fund balance of 11.6 broken down, 10 million of that is unassigned. The other 1.6 is either non-spendable, restricted, committed, or otherwise assigned. That means our unassigned fund balance as a percent of total expenses at 24.4%. Our policy, as a reminder, is 17%. Our unassigned fund balance dollar amount would pay 2.9 months of expense if it was prorated evenly throughout the year, and our policy is at 2. So we ended the year at 24.4 in 2.9 months. Our policy is 17% in 2 months.
And I think that your one statement in the middle of that is fairly important if it were prorated on a monthly basis. So I think it's important for mayor and council to understand, while you may have 2.9 months worth of working, funding, you don't get the bills that way. You don't get the same bills every month. That,
Right.
that those bills come sporadically. Some of them, state share bills come quarterly. County share bills come in, and then some entities give you some of that money, quarterly or monthly or every 6 months. And so it isn't like you're actually getting that money, every month repetitively, like regular employment or regular billing expense.
That's correct. And then just with the general fund and talking fiscal year 18, there was really three big things that occurred that were the reason for this. So our real estate total property revenue was $800,000 higher than budget and higher than fiscal year 17 levels. And again, our dollars are based on the information that we get from the State of Maryland's Department of Assessment and Taxation from our constant yield. That $800,000 difference wasn't because we annexed or did anything different, but our assessed levels were higher and our appeals were lower, which is a good thing. We wouldn't want it to be the other way, because if we got to the middle of the year and we're lower in revenue, we would have to find a way to make up that amount very quickly. But so the $800,000 there. As a reminder, in fiscal year 18, we did a one-time transfer from the health insurance fund because they had a surplus, a little $500,000. Again, one time. That's not going to necessarily keep repeating every single year. And then third. third but not least, one of the largest things that happened in fiscal year 18, our salaries, benefits, including overtime, was $600,000 below budget. And the reason for that is we had a significant number of vacancies in our departments that, especially within the police department, timing-wise, they're just not going to be replenished and filled in a month or two.
The three liabilities that you, benefit liabilities that you cite, what happens when they become solvent? So, anyway, the police and fire, once the 34 million
Yes,
becomes solvent.
never happened, but
I know,
yes.
but what happens at that point?
So our liabilities would get much smaller, our fund balance would grow. So our liabilities would shrink, but our fund balance would no longer be a negative.
On the citywide
So
standard.
it would
Would you-
mean that we've accumulated.
Would you gain anything would you gain anything over that same period, percentage-wise, if you had the $34 million to put that and say, now it's solvent?
We could put $30 million there today, and then depending on what happens this particular year, say we have a lot of retirees, we've got a lot of vacancies, so contributions are smaller. We could have another $1 million unfunded by the time we get to next year.
So there's no benefit to prepaying it?
We could ask our actuarial. Could ask Chris if he's still here, but that's a very objective question. Benefit for us to prepay our $30 million in unfunded liability?
Well, I'm not gonna say yes or no, but generally speaking, what the actuarial will factor in is what is your anticipated period of time that you wanna fund it over? And that is one of the assumptions that they build in when they'll calculate an annual, suggested required contribution. And one of the factors is how many years do you wanna tackle that $30 million liability over?
And what's the interest rate we're earning on our investments that's sitting there? So if the market, say June 30, say the market stays great all year long,
So
June
thinking-
28th, the market goes whoo, or the value in our plan goes whoo, our unfunded liability portion again is a large dollar.
If you put in the 30 million today, you still run the risk that at some point in time that it won't always be at 100%, given if the market crash or things outside of your control, because there's also lots of assumptions that go into salary increases, inflation, when people retire and things of that nature.
So if we're not talking pension plans, but we talk about retiree health insurance, one way to do that would be have a known liability like that, pay it, but then also have a known factor that you're going to contribute each year. The only way I could possibly foresee doing that is if there were massive changes to the retiree plan and we said every retiree gets a stipend of X dollar amounts per year, and then you contribute that amount every single year, and then you're fully funded always. And it's a more finite number. The only difference you'll have is members get added and members decrease. But aside from that, in the health insurance and retiree side, as well as on the pension plan, there's so many other factors, because in the retiree side, they look at life expectancy.
Right.
And they're actually getting ready to implement a change probably in another, not in 19, but probably for 20. They're looking at doing life expectancy rates and doing a different mortality table for public safety employees and retirees. So as lifespan either increases or decreases, we're going to see a definite change in the amount of what we're expecting to have to pay out over that 24-year too. So I have a slide in here. I've labeled it first quarter fiscal year 19 review, because I felt, much as Councilmember Alshire was just mentioning, you know, everybody thinks, oh, you know, you get all your revenue, you get a little bit each month, or you're paying all your expenses, and it's that same way, but that's not true. So our largest, in the general fund, our largest revenue source, again, is our property tax revenue. If you look on that third column, year-to-date through September, so that was our first quarter, July, August, September of 2018, we have 28.8 million reflected in property tax revenue. That's the majority of, I'm really sorry, because we put it on. Because the majority of that is billed in June, where the rest of our revenue sources come in sporadically throughout the year. So for instance, we've almost, through September, have 91% of all of our revenue that was budgeted for property tax revenue. But when you look at one like state and county share taxes, only 16%. So for the first quarter, general fund revenue is at 31.5 million. Total annual budget for fiscal year 19 is at 45.7. So honestly, when we looked at all the categories of the ones that come in a little bit each month versus the ones that get front-loaded in June, we're pretty much right on track right now with our estimates for revenue for fiscal year 19. On the expense side, I tried to break down and show wages, benefits, and just payroll costs separately from all the other expenses. So for the first quarter in the general fund, we're at about $7.1 million. Thank you, Jennifer. And our total annual budget's 29.3, so we're right about 24%, which would be the same of about a quarter of the way through the year, which is good because as long as our employees don't come and go throughout the year, the benefit packages aren't really going to change, so we would expect it to be at 25%. Some of the other expenses, specifically, I'm going to mention debt service. We've already spent $1.4 million through September. Our annual budget's 2.6. So when these big bonds that we do, and we have to, they're all due at different times throughout the year, but you can see we've already had to pay in the first 3 months 52% of all of our annual debt payments, which is fairly significant. But overall, total expenses is right at 11.8 million, or 25%, amazingly enough, which never happens, of our annual budget on the expense side. So again, it seems like for the first quarter, the first 3 months of fiscal year 19, the expenses are right in line with where we budgeted and expected them to be. The last slide that I want to talk about is I just want to come back and talk $1.1 million surplus that was in the general fund. Again, I cannot emphasize this enough. That is before we consider any police and fire pension, Maryland State pension, and OPEB liabilities. But realistically, that $1.1 million, we had already committed and provided a $200,000 payment in fiscal year 19 to the Maryland Theater. At the same time, we were committed to putting it back to an assigned fund balance to be utilized for the Class A building, which is part of our Catalyst project. So we're going to deduct that. And then, as a reminder, when we did fiscal year 19 budget, if you look in your budget book, fiscal year 20, we were projecting a $2.2 million deficit. And based on where our numbers ended for 18, where our numbers currently are for 19, I'm going to need $700,000 to $900,000 for CIPs if we're going to do any infrastructure projects. Separate from things that are grant funded, separate from things that are bond funded, but we're going to need to be able to utilize that within our fiscal year 20 budget.
So that's still, giving all that you just said there, that still leaves us 24% in their general fund reserve.
No, if I take, that's before, that's with the 1.1 there. If I move the $200,000 out of that category
Okay.
into assigned, we're no longer at 24.4. And if we reappropriate or utilize the $700,000 to $900,000 for fiscal year 20 budget for capital, no.
So what is the percentage?
We'll be back closer to 19%, I think, or 17%.
It'll be more than that. I don't know how anybody else feels, but I'm pretty sure that Class A building is gonna happen in this next.
You would like to what?
I don't think the Class A building, that the 200,000 that we're gonna put back in, isn't gonna happen in this next fiscal year, just like it didn't happen in this past fiscal year.
Well, just as a reminder, we did the RFQ or RFI several years ago, and we committed, and we did formal vote and action that we would set aside that 250 and leave it in a separate bucket in fund balance. And we gave a time period, and I think we still have another 2 fiscal years left on that, for that project to come, to move forward. And for that period of time, we were gonna set that aside.
That we've
And then we took a
received
separate motion.
one response to that RFP.
That's correct, we received one.
Okay. All right.
And again, we can take separate action to totally move that out and say we're not gonna do that, but we would have to notify that developer
Yeah, I
and
understand.
modify that agreement because we
understand,
had a
yeah.
timeline in there.
You gotta resend that
I
motion.
understand.
Are there any questions?
I don't understand what you're carving this $900,000 out for.
I would like the ability to reutilize it and reappropriate it in fiscal year 20 budget as a funding source for some of our CIP projects.
Yeah, but that sounds like that's a budgetary discussion that would
And it-
occur.
Well, and it would be
And
just
it
in
would
your
be.
proposed budget.
I mean, right
Yeah,
now, it
right.
should be put into,
It's in the general fund and unassigned.
Yeah, it's not going anywhere now,
but it
Councilman.
should
It's-
go, I mean, our policy dictates that it goes to our general fund reserve, right?
And that's exactly where it's at.
Okay,
Yeah, that's where it's at. This was just
okay.
a projection on.
I just know that there was other conversations and there were
You gotta
other
sit
thoughts
out
and
there.
ideas on ways to utilize it. And I'm cautioning us in that I'm already looking at some of the numbers. We've already looked at where we ended in fiscal year 18, and while it was strong, know that we,
I just wanna make sure you're not setting it out in some separate space
No, no,
somewhere.
no.
no,
And
it's,
No, it's
a-
going into that fund
It's in the,
that
it's in the fund balance.
takes like nitroglycerin to loosen that fund up to get
And
any
it-
money out.
that is not true.
That's where it's going.
That's
Well, I mean, it
not
should.
true.
I mean, that's a decision of the elected body
No, we've used the fund balance.
as part of
We
the
have used
budgetary
fund balance.
deliberation, not
Yes.
some unilateral line that we say, oh, we got this extra money, we just set in some line somewhere and we're just gonna spend it.
No, no.
Otherwise, it might as well be the hotel motel fund, right?
It's,
it
that's
should
right.
go to
It's in our
economic
$10.6 million
development.
that was included in the other slides. It's part of the 24. It's just, at this point, my thoughts on why we wouldn't spend it elsewhere just yet until we know what fiscal year 20 budget's gonna look like in another.
again,
Well,
I
yeah, I
think
mean,
two
if you
months.
know that you've got $900,000 to work with in CIP projects, then you build your budget to fill that $900,000.
Actually,
No,
Mr. Mayor, if we look, when we did our fiscal year 19 budget, we cut our CIPs that needed transfers from general fund from 2 million down to 800,000.
No, you didn't.
And at the same time, we pushed stuff into fiscal year 20. And in fiscal year 20, we said we were gonna need almost 2 million. And I'm saying, I've told our managers, and Jennifer had the pleasure of sending that email out to our managers, telling them, realistically, we're looking at where our numbers are right now in fiscal year 19. They're not gonna have it for their budget. So if I don't have any monies and the flexibility to utilize the surplus that we did have, unless they can fund other funding sources, then they're not gonna be able to put it in.
Great conversation for March.
Yes.
That 900,000 that's in the reserve now, that is invested, right?
Yes. And either, so our cash is split. We have cash that's in our operating account. We have cash that's in CDs, probably 12 million in individual CDs. And then we have some that's invested through the Maryland local governmental pool, as well as 2 money markets. We're very restrictive on what we can do in the way of where we can invest monies by state of
By the
Maryland
state,
law.
yeah.
Right.
No risk.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, I want to commend finance staff for the audit findings, because that's a very, an unmodified opinion is the best opinion you can get. So thank you very much, Michelle, and your team.
And I want to thank and acknowledge Chris and his group for being here again.
Oh, yes.
And, really and truly, I've worked with a lot of different audit firms, and typically, and Chris, close your ears, because I'm not going to do this. You've had so sad, you set a precedent. But throughout the year, if I called with a single question or an email, it was billed by the hour. And they weren't always as receptive or as quick to respond. Chris always responds, even the other partner, Bill Seymour, always responds. Even on a weekend, even on a personal cell phone, so.
Thank
Thank
you.
them.
All right, next up is the Hagerstown Municipal Band presentation. Christoph Slager, the president, and Dawn Rayner, the treasurer.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for asking us in. Always glad to come in and talk about the Hagerstown Band. If you're curious, I play tuba. Dawn plays clarinet. I know we have a French hornist at the table and a former flute player, and
A flute player.
a flute player, two flute players. Very good. We were asked to come in to sort of give you, I guess, a quick synopsis of the band and operations of the band and what's happening. So, just real quick, the band was formed in 1915 by this organization, the city, and also the Chamber of Commerce. They took 4 concert bands that existed within the city, and they put them together and made one professional playing organization with the hopes of having a professional conductor. Those minutes from 1915 still exist in our archive room. So if you're ever interested, we'll be glad to show you in the minute book. Our first conductor was Vermond Noust. They did a national search and found Vermond in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. He came, started conducting. He was there for a couple years. Then we had 3 more conductors after that, but in 1920, Dr. Peter Buys was hired as conductor. He went from 1920 to 1959, and he has associations with John Philip Sousa and the Sousa Band of that time. We hired the current conductor in 1974. He is the 8th conductor, and he has been going now almost 45 years, 46 years as conductor. And still going very strong, Our audience sizes on any given Sunday evening is about 300 people. Usually July 4th, we could add another 100 people to get close to 400. The city park improvements are very, very well done. Compliment the city and its engineering department for that. People are filling the benches on every Sunday evening, and they still bring and have the opportunity to bring lawn chairs and picnic dinners like they have done for quite a long time. We have a picture in the archive room from about 1922, I guess, where someone took a picture from the band shell out, and the path that comes down from the mansion house, the audience stretched from just about in front of the band shell the entire way back. So that was the thing to do in the 20s before TV, and we're still continuing that tradition. Our players come from anywhere from retired United States military players. We have, I think, 3 or 4 now in the band, representing Air Force, Army, and I think Air Force, Army are the only 2 branches right now that are represented. Part of our mission is to get high school kids through that organization. If they wish to take a music career or some kind of performance career, we open the door, let them in, they play, they get sight reading experience, and if they can do that sight read that we need, that level, they're in, and they play all 11 concerts. So we play from about the 1st of June through the last of August. And for the last couple years, including the concert band, we've put together a big band. the H&B Big Band, that gives their concert at the last Sunday, usually this year I think it was August 26th, and that's under the direction of Mr. Joel Guyton, who is one of our trumpet players in our trumpet section. So we receive $18,000 from the city, and we use that $18,000 to pay Lynn for his services. He makes about $4,500 a year for his services. And then the band itself, the concert band, costs about $13,000. And then the big band's probably another $200-300. So that exhausts the $18,000. We do not receive any money from anyone else. However, we do have some very faithful contributors. They give us money every Sunday night, usually $25 or so. But this year, we actually collected in donations probably close to $2,000. So our practice is, if we need music, we need equipment. In fact, we're looking for equipment now because some of the equipment's ancient. We'll say to our audience, hey, we're looking to do this, and they come up with it. So it's good to know that we have a base out there that does support some of those needs. We have quite a few memorial donations received. We've got players, we have audience members that request that have been there. Some of those, one I can think of right now that just passed recently, I think over a 30 to 40-year time span, they were at every concert. And they come, and it's part of a Sunday night ritual. It has, over the years, I've really found out how important the band is to the people that come. They really enjoy it. The one thing we added this year was we were getting some phone calls and communications from people that just can't walk from either Virginia Avenue or any of the surrounding parking lots into the band show. Keep in mind, the improvements are great, but you still have people, walkers, wheelchairs, they just can't get in there. So we approached the Community Action Council, and we swung a deal with them to use one of their CAT transportation units. And so we ran it every Sunday night. Had, thankfully for Lou Scally at JJ, he was pushing it. We announced it from the stage, but it takes a little while to get going. So, but we did have maybe 10 people ride the thing sort of in weeks 5 through 11. So we did support that. We were able to do that. And for a $600 donation to Community Action Council, it was well worth it. We're going to probably do that again next year because I think if more people can get there, they definitely will get there. A lot of the nursing homes and assisted living facilities, they also are interested in coming. We'll set up chairs if we have to. Even at the Mansion House, you can sit and listen. You don't necessarily have to see the band, but you can listen to the band. So that's our short presentation to you. I'll take any questions or entertain any questions you have.
I don't have any questions, thank you.
Certainly. This will be 105th season of the band, and still going strong, so.
What time does it begin on those Sunday evenings and end?
7:30, usually we block 7:30 to 9, usually. And it's interesting because the city, this municipal band concept that was around in this city in 1915, other cities have started something like that, but Hagerstown was way ahead of the curve on this. So the early relationship was the Hagerstown band was actually a part of the city. We're not that way today. We're our own 501c3, but the conductor was actually paid by the city and under the insurance of the city at one time. So you can see how that relationship evolved. 2 years ago, I got a call from the state of Arkansas, or a lady in Arkansas, that was going to their city council to start the concept of a municipal band, and they did. So it is something that probably is growing in popularity because councils like you wish to give something for their citizenry, and this is an excellent way to do that. So, again, we appreciate what you do for us.
Is there anything that you need from us going into the next season?
Well, probably some of the chairs are getting rickety over there. Now, remember, there's other people using the shell, which is fine. But the chairs will probably need replaced, and I would say sooner than later. The shell itself probably needs some maintenance. Because, I mean, it was built in 1936, and, we've been
We've done
using-
some improvements to it.
Yeah,
Yes,
right.
yes.
And yes, that stage extension was really good, because now we could actually get a chorus behind us. And, just at our last board meeting, the United States Army Chorus, that's part of the United States Army Band, they were here 3 years ago,
Yes.
4 years ago. They made it very clear they'd like to come back, because in Hagerstown, they performed for the largest audience they ever, one of the largest audience they've ever performed for, because usually they're performing for parties that generals put on, and there's only like, some odd people, but here they had 300 people they could sing to. So if not at North High, we've got enough room in that stage extension, we could push the band out, put the chorus in the back, so. But that, definitely with the band shells someday, it's just needs some maintenance. I don't think it's major, but,
Well, you always gotta do routine maintenance.
yeah.
Right.
Doesn't matter what you have.
Right,
I saw Rodney nodding his head about the chairs, so.
yeah. Yep,
And we're gonna work on it this spring.
okay. Yeah, and we could use more. I mean, there's people constantly looking for places to sit. But I can tell you, the shell itself, the actual place where we play, it's rounded. So actually, I could stand at one end of the shell and talk normally. Dawn could be at the other end of the shell. My
Yes, I
voice
can.
will travel the whole way around. So if we ever replace that shell, we got to get the circular part out, build it, and put it back, because there's nowhere
It's wonderful.
that I know of, and everybody that visits there is saying, we've never seen anything like this. So again, we do have some unique things with this band.
Good things,
And,
yes.
and people are aware of it. People in Washington are aware of it, so.
All right, Chris, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you
Yep,
very
thank you,
much.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, proposed Hagerstown Youth Advisory Council, gonna be kicked off by council member Shelley McIntyre and Joe Thompson.
They said I didn't have to move down, so I'm gonna stay here. All by myself. So I want to introduce, of course, you guys know Jill Thompson, but this is Crystal Martinez. Crystal is a senior at Tech High and has been very helpful with the thought behind this proposed Hagerstown Youth Advisory Council. I also have, there's a lot of community partners in the audience, the Hagerstown Housing Authority, the Girl Scouts, Girls Inc., the Girls and Boys Club, and the Washington County Student Government Association. So thank you all for being here. I really appreciate your support. So rather than go through the paperwork here, I just want to talk about kind of my thought behind this Youth Advisory Council, which I would suggest to be an ad hoc committee instead of making it so formal, since it's new and, we're kind of looking at it to be a test and see how far we can get with it. Every generation of youth, they form their own identity and they look for a new path to carve. Trends and activities and interests of our youth, they change from generation to generation. And we all have different, my parents don't see the same things that I do, and my children definitely don't see the same things that I do. And the youth, they want a voice in the government. It's our responsibility to take care of the next generation, and we need to teach the youth about civic engagement beyond paying taxes and voting. We need to teach them how to be involved in the community. So the purpose of the proposed advisory council for Hagerstown is to advise the city on issues that affect the youth in the community. I feel like we make decisions about them without them. We can look to this recommended youth advisory council as the primary communication link between local government and the youth. They can facilitate community meetings to discuss the issues and suggest improvement. They can assist in planning and implementing various events to benefit the youth in the community, and they can recognize the abilities and accomplishments of their peers. By listening to and utilizing the ideas of these young people, we can gain fresh perspective for the future of Hagerstown, which we all want to move forward positive. I can guarantee you that when I was in high school, I did not think I was going to be a council member or ever aspire to be one. So imagine that possibility. You know, not many youth think that they're going to be a council member, be the mayor. They think about it when they're like 3 or 4, when they say that's when they want to be when they grow up, but usually that goes away, right?
I don't know, I'm still 3, I don't know what you're talking about.
We can teach them to interact with the government with a positive approach. They could generate a pipeline in order to work for local government, since we constantly compete with, private sector. I would insist that we have a well-rounded council, many with diversity and inclusion from all different backgrounds, maybe looking to the youth that wouldn't necessarily migrate to this type of opportunity. I would also recommend that this first Youth Advisory Council, they set the strategic vision of what the Youth Advisory Council looks like. I think that's very important, that we not dictate what they're going to do, and they would create their own bylaws. It would be their voice. We would find out what they want to embrace. And then how do we find out if they're successful? Well, we ask them. We find out what their passion is. We find out what they think the issues are. So tonight, we're seeking consensus to the council to move forward with forming a Hagerstown Youth Advisory Council. And with your support tonight, we can bring it back to regular session in December for approval for a resolution. Jill?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that our department would be pleased to be the lead staff for the advisory council. I think it fits nicely within the Department of Community and Economic Development because we specialize in volunteer engagement and civic engagement with a couple other programs like the Main Street Hagerstown program and our Neighborhoods First program. So I think it's a good fit, and I also see that it would be our department working also cross-department with other city agencies for their engagement as well. And I know Parks and Rec is interested, Hagerstown Police Department has shown interest and support, so I think it'll be a well-rounded support from staff at all levels.
Crystal?
I just want to stress that a Youth Advisory Council would really show that city government supports youth and values our opinion, which is very important to us.
What's the necessity of having all 9 youth participants be from the city? I think that's what it says here.
It is. We would want the Hagerstown Youth Advisory Council to be all from Hagerstown, live within the city limits.
So last meeting, there was a group of North High students that came up, one of which was my niece, happened to be my niece, that spoke from North High, lives just outside of the city, but obviously coordinated with those other 3 students, a fairly big task of the city farmers market. And, they spoke of the importance. And I guess for me, the reason that I asked that, and that I think it's somewhat important for us to extend that opportunity, to students in the North and South High school district areas is in part because I think that there is some traditional sense of separation that needs to be broken down, that I think we received growing up, whether you live in the city or outside of the city, and frankly have differences of opinion. The further outside of the city you get, even though you share close association with classmates that live in it, that you interact with every day, and a lot of the services and benefits and amenities that you take advantage of. And I think that would help break that down to some degree, much like our efforts for redevelopment of downtown are breaking down those barriers of how our generation was taught that downtown just wasn't a great place to be. I guess that's the benefit that I see, is that I don't think that kids, that live within sort of what I'll call the greater Hagerstown area, will get that unless they have that opportunity to participate and say, oh, that's what a city's about, not frankly the negative things that they've been taught about, and then view their respective peers on often.
Well, I think that, go ahead,
I don't know
I'm
how else to
sorry.
say that.
I was gonna say, actually, I like the idea of, I think it should be, you have to attend a Hagerstown City School, obviously, south or north, but like, that's a good example. My parents I grew up across from South High on a little side street, but it's county. I looked at city limits, so I attended South High, so I wouldn't have been eligible because I lived in Hagerstown, my address was Hagerstown, but it wasn't Hagerstown corporate.
I mean, I think that if we say that you attend a city school,
Yeah.
if that border is what you're
Something
talking
that,
about.
or even no more than 4, can be from outside of the city. Something that adds that mix, because, I mean, it just exists,
Yeah, I understand, I
it's
understand.
there.
I think that because it's an ad hoc committee and we're not putting, I mean, we could, figure out what to do the first year and, expand on it. I'm okay, I think that, going with just within the city limits, maybe, I understand what you're saying and having it just with city schools, but we're also reaching out to homeschools and private schools and,
Yeah, I'm not saying it has to be school-based. I would just like it to say that, something to the effect that no more than 4 or up to 4 members of the 9 can be outside of the city. I just think that level of diversity is what you need in order to begin to bridge that.
to start that.
Difference of perspective that I think, frankly, is to some degree a taught behavior of living inside and living outside of the city and this community exists.
How do you feel about that, Crystal?
I think that's a good idea. I think you'd have to say something along the lines of having one of the city schools be your home district school, because there are some kids who transfer to North High for the IB program or things like that. But it's very true. I don't think, I live in the city now, but I moved and I don't think I lived in the city before. So it would be nice for some of the students, maybe up to 4, to be able to participate.
So one of the things, the first year was 9 voting members, and then of course there were 2 non-voting members up to age 21. So are you saying 4 of the 9?
Yeah, but I like your idea that, because I think it addresses your concern. I like your idea that it says north or south is your home school.
Mm-hmm.
That I think addresses both of our points.
I mean, I wouldn't have known as a 17, 18-year-old that I didn't live in Hagerstown. I
Right.
lived in Hagerstown, went to South High. I was a Hagerstown kid, but I technically didn't live in Hagerstown. I mean, I don't even, it was one and the same to me in high school, so I don't think it would be fair to exclude that population.
Yeah, currently I don't see any conflict between Hagerstown residents, city residents, and those outside, but just to be more inclusive, maybe those who have a city homeschool can be a member.
You either live in the city or north or south of your home school.
Jesse's with the Student Government Association. Do you find that that would be any kind of, do you think that would be a benefit?
I think there's some valid points as to the fact that we do have two very big high schools with, city high schools, but not all students do come from within the city. But I think the community at large does use a lot of the resources here and accesses it. So I think it's a valid point, the more inclusive we can be, I think the more we gain a perspective on what the city really does offer our youth and really our residents as far as, the good things that can come out of it.
And the model that I was looking after, most of the nation that have youth advisory councils are really, either within the city limits. It's typically a requirement, but I think that we are in a unique situation with, how close the county and city lines are, so. Okay.
Or how goofy our lines are.
You said,
when you look,
I didn't, they are a little,
they're like a squiggle.
they are a little strange, for sure.
Let's see, the appointment would be by the mayor. How does the nomination procedure?
So we would have to create an application.
Mhm.
So then we would be going out to, different organizations and through the guidance counselors and, really promoting the application process. And then just like when we appoint someone to any commission, so it would be our selection. And again, we would want to make sure that we are, inclusive and diverse and all backgrounds, and then appointed by the mayor.
I love this, thank you.
The term would be for 1 year as an ad hoc? The reason why I ask is an ad hoc committee is usually for 1 year.
Not necessarily. We were trying to stagger it, because that was one of the things that we were trying to create. I think that may be in here. I think that was something that we had talked about, where it would be, because they wouldn't have an opportunity just with 1 year to get things accomplished. It would just be, like, the first year, they would just be setting up, bylaws and really creating the Youth Advisory Council. So we were trying to make the first term 2 years, and then allowing more people to come in that second year. So then they were kind of overlapping one another. Is an ad hoc, I guess an ad hoc committee is just 1 year.
But it can be extended.
Okay.
Wouldn't you want, if you had the ability, to do 2-year terms are great, don't get me wrong. I totally believe you can't get anything accomplished within 12 months. It just, it's nothing like government, that's for sure. So, to have it staggered, have maybe half the group be 1 year, the other half be 2 years, and then the next group come in and they're 2 years. That way it starts off, everybody's there for the first year. And then, we did that with,
I think in the Ethics Commission.
yeah, the Ethics Commission, yeah. That way, everybody had that first year, because it was an ad hoc, and then we appointed and staggered those terms. That way you had some repetition in there. You weren't turning it over every 2
Right.
years,
Especially starting out, that was our big thing, how long do we make it? So.
Yeah. So
stagger.
everybody gets a year, and then you choose, every other person that you appoint to begin with for the first year does 2 years. And then at the end of the first year, you appoint 4 more, and then they get 2 years, and then you're staggering at 5-4, 5-4, 5-4.
Okay. There was gonna be we were discussing an age-out policy too, because at one point, when they turn 21, then they would age out of the program, so. And I do want to add too that, one of the partners is Washington Goes Purple, which obviously is, one of our biggest concerns is the opioid crisis and teaching our youth. So I think that it's very important to, be in partnership with that organization. she's also represented here, so. Figured I'd throw that in. You're welcome.
Okay, yeah, love it, so. I like your time frame too. I like your time.
Thank you. Kristen, do you love it?
Yeah, good job.
I think we're good.
Yep, we're good.
Thank you.
Looks up, next is the picker update.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Staff requested to put this item on the agenda because, for two reasons. One, we wanted to address we need to be more business-friendly comments that we hear from council members, members of the community, and also to gain closure on direction we were receiving from the council in the spring on the permitting and inspection recommendations from Picker. And so in the memo and the PowerPoint that we have, we got into specifics about enhancements that we've been making over the past several years to be more business-friendly, and then over where we have some inquiries over exactly what was meant in the spring on some of these code changes that might be required. But before we launch into that, first I wanted to address comments that I hear that are disturbing to me when people say everyone knows you cannot work with PCAD. And that frustrates my entire department when we hear this. And so I just wanted to give you a little bit of a feedback and some information about us. So it's easy to be negative about code administration, codes, and enforcement. No one wants to be told what to do. But without us being diligent in what we do, we cannot ensure the safety of the public. And all you have to look at right now is Prince George's County and the MGM project where something tragic happened, and now people are saying, how in the world did that feature that caused that tragedy pass inspections? You need to be diligent. We aren't just business friendly, we are protecting the public. And so we always need to keep that in the back of our minds. That's our core responsibility. This room always chokes me up. That's our core responsibility. All right, so, but we also recognize we need to balance that with the public's expectations that we need to be business friendly as much as possible. And so over the past several years, me and my staff have been looking at our processes to see what are we doing and why do we do it and whether we can make changes. Are we doing things just because we've always done it and maybe it makes no sense, or is there a valid reason behind it? Or we hear from our stakeholders, from our customers, it really would be nice if you could do this a little bit differently, do it this way so that it would be easier for us as customers. And so we have been working on that with our own observations, with the feedback from our customers, from stakeholder groups, like the Penmar Board of Realtors, the Landlords Association. We meet with these folks periodically, and they will come up with ideas, and we take that under advisement to make changes. But it's a tricky situation. We've made many changes, though. And in addition, last year, for much of the year, staff were meeting with the Picker Group, which is the Permits, Inspections, Code Compliance Review Committee that was appointed by the Mayor and Council. In addition, assessments were done then, and recommendations for enhancements were made. And we'll get into more detail with the PowerPoint. We also created a SurveyMonkey survey system. We promote that to all of our customers when they touch us for permits, inspections, plan review, planning, any of the things that we do. We recommend please go to the SurveyMonkey feature, give us some feedback so that we can see how we're doing and whether there's some additional enhancements that we can make. The result is we've made a large number of enhancements to reduce what people might view as unnecessary bureaucracy. We've also, to improve perceptions about business friendly and also to be more business friendly. So, but it's clear from comments that I hear from this body as well as secondhand from the community, there's no public awareness of the things that we have been doing to be more business friendly while also still maintaining our core responsibility to protect the public. And so we need to work on that. We've been brainstorming with our younger staff. We've got some staff in their 20s. I'm in my 50s. I'm not close to the social media kind of stuff beyond grandma's Facebook stuff. So we're getting their ideas. What can we do to reach out to people in a fun way to promote what we do, provide helpful tips, give updates on what things are going on, just to get us more out there in the community as a group that is working to help, not to hinder. They may think we're hindering, but we are. Our goal is to help to make sure things are safe and that we protect the quality of life of our community. And so we are, in addition to brainstorming with the young folks in our department and actually planning to let them really run with stuff, we're going to get with the communications manager of the city to develop this public, positive messaging campaign, which also would be consistent with goals that the Mayor and Council just adopted about that type of thing. So last thoughts I want to leave you before we get to the PowerPoint. If you hear something in the community about my department, don't just say something to whoever you heard from. Keep an open mind, get details from these folks, or put these folks with us so we can learn what the issues are, not just to hear back, everyone knows you can't work with PCAT. If there is an issue, I want to hear it. We want to hear what it is so we can figure out if we can do something about it with the resources that we have. This is the only way for us to learn. We can't learn from just people just saying you can't work with us. We need to know, why are you saying that? What can we do to address that? We have very skilled staff who take great pride in what they do to protect our community. And so this means that making sure that changes that are in the field are approved by the project designers, and it makes sure especially that work done in the field meets code and is safe. We don't want an MGM in the city of Hagerstown. We also recognize that we must be diligent in assessing where our process is bogged down for our customers and do what we can to enhance it or give it with the resources that we have. And so now we'll have this PowerPoint, and we're also going to include some input we received today from the Greater Hagerstown Committee with additional ideas of how they would love it if our processes could change to be more friendly to contractors and folks in the field.
So Kathy gave some summary of some of the things that we're going to touch on here during this PowerPoint presentation here. So she mentioned the Survey Monkey. Like we said, we've received since 2017, it was February 2017 that we started putting out with any permit application that is sent to or that's processed in our office, any plan review that's completed, and then also any license inspection that is done. People get an email from us asking them to participate in the survey. We received 185 surveys back, and as you can tell on the slide there, we're either meeting or exceeding expectations to 90 to 95% of the time. People that are participating in the survey are complimenting us and what we do and how our office operates. We are always willing to listen to people and stuff there, but our goal is always to meet people's expectations or to exceed them. And 7 out of 10 times on the surveys that we get, we're exceeding the expectations. A lot of times I'll get calls from people that are out of town, and they'll, one the other day just said last week that it's always, he was asking what's the process, and I explained what the process is, and he goes, I love working with small towns. So it's just that because the small towns are so much easier to work with than larger towns. Like Kathy had mentioned, some of the positive messaging stuff that we're doing. You know, we got a lot of public perceptions out there that are not reality. People a lot of times like to relive their old stories. When we talk to people, we'll say, give us an example. They were going, well, in 1980, this is what we had, and you know, and 30 years ago, this is what happened. It's not giving us anything relevant to nowadays. We need something that's more current and what we're trying to address. Because some of the things to forget is that our department was just created a few years ago. So we're taking very strong initiatives to try to be more positive with things and to try to address the issues that are coming up with people. The one thing like that was mentioned back in October by this body itself was saying about how the negative messages that are put out about our town on social media all the time and what's going on in Hagerstown and what's really going on in Hagerstown, of how all the negative comments are out there about our town and that type of stuff, and how it attacks the electeds that are here and also staff on what goes on. And then back in just last month, Councilmember Metzler mentioned about how easy it is to criticize when he's talking about the parking fund. So everything's very easy to say negative stuff. Councilmember Alshire mentioned about how people are warriors behind keyboards. So we have a lot of comments where people like to say things, and we need to always address those things as positively as possible. Some of the stuff like Kathy was mentioned, that our HR department does a lot of webinars for customer service. Our staff is always the leading department on trying to take those initiatives and attending those webinars And one of the things that they always talk about is, that you don't badmouth the organization or anything along those lines. You don't jump on the bandwagon when someone's talking negative about them. You always are trying to ask questions to get clarifications. Why are you having this experience or things of those nature? So we're trying to get that positive message out there about how can we be better and address those things. So some of the stuff that we're talking about promoting and sharing on our social media stuff that we're doing is just some general things like we talk about. We do these flyers all the time, so if, where to put your trash can, just a common thing, but getting that out to more of an audience, because I can put door hangers all day long type of a thing, but we don't have the budget for something along those lines. So things that nature. Also, just we're in that time of year, we have this stuff that we share with people of what to do with your holiday decorations. Essentially, what is code compliant, because some of the stuff that's mentioned that, on this fact on here from the NFPA, nearly half of holiday decoration fires happen because decorations are placed too close to a heat source. So just general education, things along that line. We're in the heating season, so we have stuff about heating as well. And then stuff that we want to promote too is that what's the right equipment to use for different things, because we have systems that are being done. It's mini split systems that Councilman McIntyre is very familiar with that are installed. The wiring for those in commercial applications must be a commercial wire. We kept on coming across it where it's residential wirings. We try to get the information out there. We do direct mailers, emails, and all that type of stuff, but it's just trying to get more information out to people and trying to do that through education efforts, helpful tips, and trying to do it through direct mailers or social media. Some of the initiatives that our office has done over the last several years, some things I've touched on, is that we're being more customer friendly. We do brochures and door hangers to educate people about codes, not instantly going right to a notice. We also send emails along with mail notices. Honestly, the emails are sent prior to the inspector even finishing the letter, because when they finish on one screen, it already sends the email, and sometimes their phones are already ringing and they're saying they're not seeing anything online. It's because they haven't finished yet. So we're always trying to say, give us a little bit of time and then you can check it. Also, we make changes to the website to address how users are using our website so that we can adjust it to when the clicks are being done. We can see what are more common on our website. Just if you're curious, the most common page viewed on our website is how to report a concern or a complaint, basically about the neighborhood. We also do mail notifications of permits being expiring 30 days before they expire. So each week on a Monday, we send out whose permit's going to expire the next 30 days to make sure that they're calling in for the proper inspections. We found this to be very effective. We also have changed the permit extension policy to allow up to 3 renewals within the same code cycle. We've also shortened the time for the FOIA so that people can get more information about fines or violations. A lot of times we get these requests at the times of settlement. They would go through the FOIA process, but that's always a 30 or 45 day. Wes could correct me on whatever the time frame is, but there's a process time period on that. We came up with a way to address it quicker to help facilitate any type of real estate sales.
Paul, stop right there. When you're talking about that particular item, the FOIA request, I mean, do you make a realtor put in a FOIA request or just a buyer?
It doesn't matter. It's anyone that wants information about the office, but we're not making them put in a request. What we're saying is we modified it so that if someone calls us and say, is there any outstanding fees or violations on the property, we can answer that. If someone calls our office, we give them that information, but sometimes people want things in writing. So we came up with a modified form to not really give them the exact information, so we're not violating FOIA, but giving the information that they need.
Sometimes they want copies. Within FOIA is the Freedom of Information Act, in case people don't know FOIA out there in TV land. But if they want copies, then we have to put it through it because there could be personal information that we need to redact, like on credit card information or whatever on permits. So that's why, if they're asking for copies or heavy research, it goes through that FOIA request. But if it's something that we can just look in the system.
Yeah, and outstanding, are there outstanding code issues with the sidewalk?
And this has come up
I mean, that
based
should
on
be something
input
that
from a realtor.
we could relatively easily be able to answer without.
Right. The most common calls I get is, why is that property condemned? And I can usually give them that answer right then and
Right.
there, so they know if it was for a malfunctioning furnace, they couldn't have heat, or an actual structural issue, so they know what type of level of investment they would need.
Okay. All right, thank you. I just didn't want to interrupt, but that was a question that was asked to me, and
Yeah, and that's a recent change based on input from a Realtor.
So some of the enhancements that we've done that maybe you all might not be fully aware of, probably somewhat aware of, but not fully aware of, is the better communication to remove surprises in the field. We have pre-construction meetings with contractors on large and medium-sized projects. This is commercial and residential, and we'll go out, meet with them before we start. It's always good to get the faces with the names and understand who they need to talk to. When it's a large construction project, sometimes these guys are bidding in that are outside the area. They don't know who the inspectors are. So they'll get their cards, they'll get their information, get faces, and they know who they're looking for. We found these to be very successful.
It also helps us ensure that the contractors, the trades contractors, are aware of any permit conditions that were on the building permit that is linked with what they do. Because in the city, we allow trades permits to be issued before the associated building permit. Sometimes there's a disconnect, and the trades folks have no idea that there were conditions placed on the building permit that affect their work. That has caused us many problems, but no one wants to change that process. So this is a way to make sure the trades folks know, by the way, make sure you look at the plans, which are currently, by the way, curled up in the corner, that look at those plans, look at the comments, because it could affect your work.
We'll try to send out an email after that meeting, because we'll do, of course, an attendance, get email addresses, send them out the permit comments so everyone can have them for their review. We encourage the inclusion of staff during progress meetings, and we encourage it. We always try to get involved with those progress meetings. Not every construction company wants us involved with their projects, but we try to get involved with the progress meetings as much as possible.
And that's worked out great with the Maryland Theater Project.
It has.
With the Pinnacle Project, with the school projects, it's very helpful, because then, as things are coming up and the contractors are talking amongst themselves and we're in the room, we can pipe up, and or they can say, hey, Paul, what about this issue? How are we supposed to handle that? Rather than waiting until an inspection.
Right, so to facilitate the UIP project, we assigned a construction liaison at the sites. One of our inspectors goes down there twice a day to go down and visit the place, go down in the morning and go down in the afternoon, just kind of see what's going on with the project. Do they have any questions? Is there anything that you need?
Any emergencies that have arisen?
Right, anything that came up through the construction today, what's going on? How can we address something here? They have the cell phone numbers, they text, they call all the time just to try to get answers to questions. Then we also attend the Maryland Theater Progress meetings. Myself and Blaine go to those meetings every 2 weeks to make sure we can address any issues that come up with those. And we get involved then with the problem solving of the issues. If something's coming up, we can sometimes provide an idea to be proposed that can actually meet code that they might not have been thinking of. What we've done is we've shifted some staff around as well to make it more time on site for inspections. We always have run with the model essentially for the last several years of one building inspector. And we've shifted things around to allow for 2 building inspectors, have one focus in the core of town and the other one focus on the outskirts of the outside the core area, so that they can be on site more often, be around a little bit longer for questions, so that if anything comes up, they can actually answer a question to something and have just a stop-in visit. Some of the changes that we've done with the picker input. Sorry, I turned my page too soon there on that one. So we've, to be more customer friendly, we started accepting copies of owner's affidavits by digital signatures. That's essentially allowing the property owner or allowing a contractor or the person applying to apply for a permit for your property. So it's just making sure it's okay. We're doing that through digital signatures. I can't tell you how many people have done digital signatures. I can tell you that the owner's affidavit's been downloaded 191 times online. I can't tell you how many have been digital and how many have been just someone printed out the form.
We used to say it had to be original and it had to be original signature, which was not as flexible as this.
We allow the payments of most utility fees when the meter is set, so that this will allow where someone can pay a certain fee up front for a new construction, and then they won't get any water until the meter's actually set, but it'll allow the permit to go ahead and go through the review process. They're not having to pay all of the tapping fees essentially up front. They just have to pay them before they get their meter set. This is a change because before you had to have everything paid up front before a permit was approved. We accept building permit applications from a permit runner. Doesn't always have to be the person that's actually signed the owner's affidavit. Essentially, we'll allow someone to come in here just to apply for a permit that has all the appropriate paperwork for the organization.
We were sending a lot of permit runners away, which was aggravating everybody, so this makes it much more flexible.
We've also posted on the webpage and emailed to contractors a manual how to pay permits online. Essentially, you have to pay at least a $100 deposit at the time of permit application. Sometimes people don't want to pay all that up front, so we created a process to where you can pay it online, and then the rest of it can be paid at a later time. We can call you, let you know when the permit's ready, and then you can essentially pay those fees when we print everything out to make it available when you come into the office to pick it up. We also facilitated architect review of the permit comments. Essentially, that's meaning that if we have a frequent customer, such as some of our architects and engineers, our boilerplate comments that are on plans, for example, we always say you have to have rear identification on your properties. This is a life safety issue for first responders to be able to know where they're coming from, the front or rear of a property. We have that on every single permit comment. It's always saying that, so that's what the inspector's looking for. So we identified project-specific plan reviews with an asterisk so that an architect that's reviewing the plan review comments can actually find what things are specific to their project rather than the boilerplate comment. We also posted online the help for homeowners to find a contractor. We listed all of the licensed contractors, electricians, and plumbers that are licensed through the city of Hagerstown on the website for people to download. Contractors have been downloaded a little over 300 times, plumbers a little over 200, and electricians a little over 200, and plumbers a little less than 200 have been downloaded. So a lot of people have been getting on to view that. For the longest time, we ran it on the front page of the city site of, find a contractor, and it was always on the front page. So we had a lot of spike early on with people looking it up. To keep projects moving along, we send weekly emails to internal and external reviewers. So each Monday, all of the reviewers in the permit process, except for fire marshal, because they review on weekends, get them on Fridays. They have who are all of the plans that need to be reviewed. So nothing sitting in a queue for a long time period of something getting lost on a desk. It's always saying, who does our office not have as a reviewer?
Because it's not just code administration staff that reviews permits. There's folks outside of our department and outside of the city that review permits.
And a lot of times we'll get for the external departments, we'll get requests. They're saying, can you add so-and-so to this? Can you add someone else? So we continue to add. Inspectors conduct inspections even though an inspection cannot pass a certain approval. So for example, if you have a project where a framing inspection needs done, so a contractor called us and said, I need a framing inspection, but they didn't have their plumbing rough inspection. You can't approve the framing because that means people can start putting drywall up. Well, if they put up the drywall, we can't see how they put the plumbing in the walls. So we will still do the inspection for the building saying, we'll approve our part of it, but we can't give the approval to put drywall up until you get the plumbing inspector in here to take a look at the plumbing work. Because sometimes contractors get ahead of themselves, want to start calling in inspections, and the plumber's not ready for his inspection yet, but the building contractor already wanted his framing inspection because he's got the drywall guy come in tomorrow and he wants his inspection. So we try to work this out in our office as much as we can, and at times we're getting those requests. The trade inspector will call the contractor just to see if they're ready, so we can't go ahead and do the inspection if they are.
And this is a change from before. If they had not had the plumbing rough, we say, no, we can't do the framing inspection. Sorry, gonna have to wait. This way, it allows those folks who are in the other trades to keep moving as much as they can before we get the final on the other contractor's work.
Also, there's the ability to track issues, holding up with the issuance of a permit. You can go online, you can actually view where it is in the review process. You can see which department hasn't reviewed something. Our office will get a lot of calls saying, you know, I haven't got my permit issued yet, and we're going, well, it's in such and such department, you need to talk to them. We've done our review. So it's trying to address that issue so that people can actually call the appropriate person for when the permit's not being reviewed by that department, rather than calling our office. They can go right to the point, not trying to go through an avenue.
Can an applicant see that themselves online?
Mm-hmm. Anyone can see that online.
And the phone number for each entity's online, like on that?
See, we're working
In
with
Frederick County, when we have the, I guess, you know, the Hanson system where, you know, you go in, you see the 5 agencies or entities that have approved it, but then each one of those, you know, it has the contact name, the phone number, and whatever the outstanding issue or issues are with that particular sign-off person.
With the limitations of our system, we don't have the phone number there, but it has the name of the person in the department with that person.
Okay.
So if they just call the general city number,
I got you.
they should be able to direct it, but unfortunately, the system doesn't allow for a phone number to be there. But it does have the name of the person that's doing the review. And then at this point, like Kathy and I were going to talk about some of the input that we got today from Greater Hagerstown. There were 3 comments. That the one was like implementing electronic submission for building permit applications and amendments and electronic signatures from architects and engineers. We are working through that final step actually right now. We're very close to getting that resolved. It just took some outside the box thinking and then working with our IT staff. And we pretty much have something resolved, just kind of finalizing that process, and hopefully have something out on January 1 here where people can submit the plans. The most challenging part is you're thinking, okay, well, they're just on a deck. They can scan that, send that to them. Understood, but we got to think big scale too. If when someone's building a $15 million project in our town, we want to make sure we can support that application, right? We got gigabytes of data that needs to be stored. So we had to work through that, thinking outside the box, but we came up with an idea. And I'll be honest, it was just last week on that one of how to work around it. So just kind of working on that last little steps to get everything through. We had a meeting last week saying that we're going to make that happen. So it's just getting that last little step.
And it has to be a workaround because we don't have the capability with our permit software to do it. So we had to come up with another way to allow it to happen.
Yeah, because I met with that company again about a month ago to just get another quote just to see what it is going to cost. Maybe they... You know, like Walmart offers rollback sales, so maybe this company did too. So it was about $300,000. So they still are a little bit higher than what we can afford. So we're going with what's free and making things work for us. Also, the implementation of like an online tracking system to let the customer know who's the knowledgeable staff person to contact. Where I see that is we already do that. I just mentioned that to you that we have that stuff. It's more educating of the public to get that out there. I sent the email out to 1,600 people the last time that whoever did work with the city of Hagerstown from 2010 to late 2017 when I sent that email. Anyone that ever did work with us to provide us with an email address. I can only send it to the people that provide us that information. So I'm getting it out as much as we possibly can, but still just educating everyone to be knowledgeable of it. And then we had another comment that Kathy seeked clarification on, and we just haven't gotten that back yet of what they're kind of looking for as far as inspections and the eliminate the scheduling for the next day. So we're not 100% sure. It wasn't
clear what it means by customers to activate inspections while on site, and so we're trying to get feedback from the individual at Greater Hagerstown who sent this, what exactly that means.
We all had different ideas on what they might have been. Yeah, we got it late this afternoon, and we all have ideas. I mean, generally speaking, if we're on site and someone's saying, can you look at that area as well, we've implemented that change to say, yeah, we'll go ahead and look at that while we're here type of a thing. I mean, the prime examples that we've made more time for our inspectors in the fall here to be on sites more with the implementation of 2 building inspectors. That's happened a lot where they say, can you look at this area? So we're certainly utilizing that now. So some of the stuff that we're going to need a little bit direction from the council here, and we came up with some staff solutions. We're making sure this is hitting the point that we were assigned with here, with the picker input. Just want to make sure we're on the right page with everyone.
Can we, before you get to that, first let me say that what you provided in this update is great. And I think that you are doing exactly what, well, I think you're doing above and beyond, you know what I mean, what the expectation is to try and sort of right some of these issues. And I think some of those issues are you know, continue to be largely a factor of time and technology. And so I think it's important to point out that, you know, contractors just function, I think, a little differently technologically today than you know, than they have in the past in terms of that time readiness of you know, the redevelopment. And I think having folks just have access to all of those contractors and the number of hits on them, I think speaks volumes to that information dissemination. But for me, before you would get into this evening, I'll tell you flat out, I got you know, communication from folks from the Picker Committee that weren't aware that we were having this part of this conversation this evening. So I don't know if you sent it out to the Picker Committee before tonight, but that's one of those areas, I think, where they would look at it and say, you know, we want to be included, you know what I mean, through the duration of this evaluation process.
I guess it was
Since
their
the
recommendations.
Since the committee's been disbanded and we were following up on the spring conversations with the council about how
Right.
to implement it, we didn't see the need, sorry.
Well, I mean, you still got a couple of red areas here.
Yeah,
That
we
was
weren't-
because in unclear messages from our last meeting with you all, not so much unclear from the picker. We know what they wanted. We're asking what's clarification from the council because it requires
Sure,
mayor and
sure.
council
So-
code changes.
And when you get to that, then, I look across the table here and I see one of our members isn't present this evening, and that's obviously by no fault of his own, but, you know, he's out, you know, this evening, and I think it requires that, because Lou obviously had some strong opinions about these items. And I would prefer that we have that inclusion of the full council to have that conversation. That's my 2 cents. Because I don't think that you had any 5-0 sort of positions, you know, on these number of items. And I don't want to exclude any member that has strong feelings about any of these remaining items.
I feel that way about Lou, but also the committee too, and I feel like maybe I dropped the ball a little bit there. I should have notified them, but I do know that they wanted to be here to at least be a part of this and see it through, since they did, like you guys, dedicate so much time to this committee.
And for expediency, I'm more than happy to go through the ones, or for you to go through the ones that are in black, that are resolved. Because I don't think that there's any in there where, and maybe I could be wrong, but you're not looking for clarification on those items, right?
Right, we wanted to be sure that what we thought we heard was what you were telling us, which is what the red stuff is. Like the replacement of a single fixture. Was it a single fixture or just replacement of any number of fixtures? And so that's what we wanted to make sure we had the clear direction from you so that when we make building code changes, we're making the right thing.
So, all right, so going on Councilmember Alshire's thing, I'll go through a couple of the changes here that are staff solutions that we were coming up with, and then some things we can handle through internal policies. They're kind of a little bit different than what was on the order here, since some of the red stuff was a little bit later, because we knew that'd be a discussion item. So on the presentation here, we have that the issue the UNO, or use and occupancy permit, when unpermitted work is observed. So essentially, the staff solution is that we will issue a temporary use and occupancy if unpermitted work is associated with the overall permits. So essentially, they start doing work in another area, but it's all part of that project itself. We'll issue a temporary certificate of occupancy and say, you know, get the permit for these couple items so we can close everything out for this space. And then we're saying
Like
that.
if you're renovating the kitchen and we're there for the permit, we see, oh, well, they decided apparently at the last minute to do something a little different over here. It's all part of that kitchen renovation, so we get a temporary, and then they work on getting the other stuff closed out.
And then we're saying if it's unassociated with the work, so let's say you're doing the kitchen remodel, and then, like any person does when you have a contractor in, you're asking them to do something else in your other part of the house, but that wasn't party for your permit, then we're saying, okay, we'll issue the certificate of occupancy, the full certificate of occupancy for the area that you had to work in, and then for that unassociated area, get another permit for that, so then we can close that one out separately, not hold up the full certificate of occupancy.
Unless the work looks like it was done over a year ago.
Correct. Another thing is that field changes observed. So we implemented this proceed at your own risk process, so that if things don't match the plans that they have that have been approved by our office, so essentially just to kind of recap on that, when someone applies for a permit in our office, they give us the drawings and how they're planning on constructing that property. But a lot of times, they don't build it the exact same way that those plans are drawn. There's field condition to change everything. So what we did was create this process of proceed at your own risk. So it does meet code, but it doesn't match these plans. So we'll give you documentation saying you can continue to proceed, but we need something in our office to document this change. We wouldn't do that before. Before we would just say, you gotta stop everything, you gotta get us new plans before you can move forward. So we're giving that. I can tell you the UIP project places, they love this. They think it's great. They like getting that type of stuff, and we get things later on. It's been widely accepted by people.
Now we just saying that you need to get it to us before the final inspection, rather than you put the brakes on, give us the plans. Now it's just saying, before we get the final, we need to have those plans updated.
The one thing that was suggested is that our process in our office has always been to get the Maryland Department of Environment involved in any demolition permit that's submitted to the city of Hagerstown to make sure any of those contaminants that they're looking for has been removed from the building before it's demolished. It was one of those things that Picker recommended not to go through them because that holds up the review time. So we're looking to develop a policy that it can be signed by the city administrator because it's a process. It's not something that needs to go through the mayor and council. Just to say, we don't want to include MDE in that process. We're just saying we're going to do it without their approval.
It's the applicant's responsibility to contact MDE. We would just usually not issue the permit until we knew for sure they'd signed off on it.
And then the other thing is waiving the permit application for a single water heater replacement, so that if someone was just doing one water heater, it'd be a $35 permit essentially, just to make sure everything's connected back correctly. We eliminate that. Comparing us to other jurisdictions in the area, it was a little bit higher, so it's just kind of getting us in more line. Actually, it'd be less than everyone else in the area to replace one water heater at your property. And that's typically like an emergency type situation a lot of times.
And that's not a code change either, which we do that by administrative order.
Correct.
So of this list for me, just two observations. One is I think that what I would like to see come back is items number 2, 3, 7, and 8.
Correct.
That's just me.
Those are the last two slides on the thing, on the presentation.
And then
Wait a minute, 2, 3.
I have
Oh,
2,
from the
3,
memo?
7, and 8 from the memo.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing, and I guess we'll talk about this next time, but I'm just gonna put my thoughts out there on it now, are under next steps, you have it stated that, once clarification is provided, on these items, necessary amendments to the building code and the local amendments, can be made during the 2019 code update. And when I read that, I'm thinking of, your recent land management code and other types of updates we've done, and I don't know what that means as it's stated. Does that mean
That's what I was going to address actually.
beginning
in
of
that next-
2019, or are we looking at like by 2020, these things should be a go?
That was what I was going to address in the next
Okay.
slide, actually, that we're kind of going over, but I can touch on it briefly just to kind of let you know. Essentially, Maryland law has it that the state of Maryland has to adopt a building code every 3 years. and they were due for adoption in January of 2018. But they did not adopt it because Maryland decided to take their code administration and their Department of Licensing and Labor and merge them into one department. Whereas our department is one department with licensing and building codes, they were not. So they merged them together and they delayed the adoption of the Maryland building codes until January of 2019. So we would have already wanted to implement these things during that time period. We were seeing how the state played out with all of this. They passed it and decided to merge them and delayed their adoption for a year, therefore delaying our adoption, because we did not want to go through the confusions for any of our contractors of having a short window of time for it being this way and then changing things for any new adoptions that would occur.
So that means if we can bring these last 4 items back this month or beginning of January, we can make all these changes in January 2019.
What we always do to try to make things easy for our construction community is that we will have Maryland will pass the law generally in January. Governor signs it at some point in time after that. Then they go effective. The local jurisdictions have 6 months essentially to make their own adjustments to the code for their unique jurisdiction. So, we have an older community, so sometimes we can make some modifications to the code during that time period. We already put together a group, which our only licensed contractor on Picker is represented on that group, that's licensed contractors that reviewed our codes. We invited everyone that was licensed with the city of Hagerstown to join this code review to see which amendments could we make to our local codes. We've done that review. We're essentially just waiting for this last input from the mayor and council, and then we could go ahead and adopt. The way we typically do it is we make the adoption date September 1 of that year, because it gets us past the construction season. So then you don't have someone applying for a deck maybe in earlier in the year, and then all of a sudden it changes, and then the contractor isn't familiar with the codes because it changed to a new one. So we try to get past the more developed season and get into September when it starts getting colder, construction slows down a little bit, and then they move into the next year. So it wouldn't be effective until September 1 of 19 is what we generally propose. The council's more than happy to change that time period. We just try to make it easier on our construction community by doing it later.
So we're just laying out how we thought we would do it, but if you've got different ideas.
I think September is too long for some of these items. I mean, I just do. Like, I think they want to see action on these items now. I think the body, one of the committee to sort of get done what it wants us to change, because we hear all the complaints of the things we're not doing, so let's get them done as quickly as possible. Especially those items that don't require code, the building code.
Oh, yeah, we're just talking about the things that do require
Okay.
code.
Yep, these are the things that require
The other ones we
code.
can do
Yeah,
as
yeah.
fast as, okay. All right, I got you.
But if you don't want to wait till September, I mean, we can be ready much sooner than that, because as Paul said, we're almost done. I think we still,
Right, we
like,
still
the
have the building to
electricians.
get reviewed and one meeting with electricians, but plumbing mechanical has already been completed. We've
But
already
if
written
the
them
state
in.
adopts it in January of next month,
Mm-hmm.
we could adopt the changes by the end of January.
Theoretically, we still have some with our code review to finish with our licensed
Well, once your code
contractors.
review is finished.
Right.
But that won't be September.
Like,
That'll
for me,
be-
I'd like to
No.
get it done by March so that we hit before the building season, especially on items like number 1, where, it talks about different types of trade permits and things like that.
And that's fine. Those are easy one off. And if we thought that we had all of council, I know Councilmember Metzger's not here, maybe some of the other items, but certainly something that we can come back when council members here and try to get consensus of what those are.
Okay.
I'd like to go back to your opening comments, your opening remarks. I really believe that perception is real. I'm sorry. So, and I appreciate all of these things. I can tell you that I have personally faxed permit requests and payment since 2010. I've never received an email. So would it be advantageous to, if a permit request or online payment request is faxed in, to maybe call the contractor and get that email address? I mean,
And put it on the application, we can make a box for it.
That'd
It's
be
only
great.
it's only if people provide us the information, that's the thing. So if we don't have the email address, I can't email you something if
No,
I
I
don't have our
know.
email address.
So what I'm saying is that since I'm obviously using an archaic form of communication, I mean, really, I think that's the only thing I use it for, actually. I mean, know that there was an online permitting, asking.
Generally, what people do is just scan the application itself and just email it to our general mailbox.
Yeah, so I must be in the dark, yeah, definitely not up with it. So, anyway, I know, you can ask staff, what, you fax something? See, I'm not the only one.
To a contractor.
So, okay.
It was also in the Dark Ages.
Again,
So-
it's all about getting the word out that we've
Right,
done these things.
exactly. So I'm gonna shout it from the rooftops because that's awesome. Makes things go a lot easier. So and contractors are fearful of retaliation. They're fearful of, well, their next project is not gonna go smoothly because they bring something to your attention. So how can we assure those folks that come forward to not be fearful of that project, the next project going south, or?
All I can say is, I want to hear it. I want to be able to make changes. Like, we had some,
Site utility workers.
site utility contractors asked to meet with us because we were doing something different from the county. The county's way was much more flexible. And so they came in, explained, you require us to have a licensed master plumber to be able to do the site work. The county doesn't require that, as long as you're so many feet away from the building.
They
And
license.
it's- We're like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. So that we're making that change when we do the 2019 changes. I want to hear, there's not going to be any retaliation. I want to hear if people are unhappy, I want to know what it is specifically, not just to say, we can't stand working with you. If something specific has happened or you have a specific idea, it would be great to hear it. Because all of these changes we're making in here, a lot of it was from input, like the Greater Hagerstown, we just heard from, the Realtor FOIA issue. We need to hear it. It doesn't help us. To be fair to us, we really need to hear the details.
I agree.
How do we go about setting up a meeting for that then? Because I still get the calls all the time from large developers that say they just don't want to invest money in the city anymore. So how do we set up a meeting so
Or
that
just have
I
that
can
developer
bring?
call me.
Well, again, there is a fear of retaliation. I've heard that over and over again. So how do we set up just a private meeting where we can bring them in and sit down and have this discussion? Like what has specifically happened? What have they seen on their projects? Why do they have this gut feel that they would rather invest in Martinsburg than invest in Hagerstown? What can we do to just set up a meeting and get them in here and do that? Because I've heard also that, they feel like there's some gatekeeping involved in terms of getting their message out. And all I know is what I'm hearing. So can I
I'd be
set up,
happy to
can
meet
I
with
set up a
anybody,
meeting?
anytime.
All right.
We love to meet them. That's the thing, that you all hear it, we don't.
And I've worked in the
So-
city since 1995. A lot of these developers know me.
I will tell you, the complaint is never about you.
No.
No.
You are always fabulous.
But I think they don't know
But-
that I'm over code, so if they gave me a call, that I have something to do with code, not just planning.
Normally, the complaints start with, Kathy's always great, but
Blah, blah, blah.
here's the issue. And I do hear the same thing. I got a call last week from somebody who said, wouldn't even give me the property address of the property that he was making complaints about because he didn't want me to real. They literally wanted to complain to me about the process and about inspectors specifically, but wouldn't give me any property information because they wanted the project to be done and closed out first. And they said they would come back and provide more information. That's,
I'm ready. Whenever they feel comfortable coming forward, I would love to hear what the
It's the
issue
thing,
is.
even if you hear a process, you gotta share that with us, because if they're sharing general processes of, well, this didn't work or that didn't work, we can at least address those items to be like, okay, this is what's going on. It doesn't help us at all when we don't know anything. If you all are getting all of these calls every day or every.
It might be, I think people might feel better if we had a closed session of some sort where they could come and they feel like there's an audience.
there's not or there is?
There is.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Just not the general public.
Not the general public. No, they want in a room where they can, but they want to know that there's somebody that has their back, that they're not gonna have a retaliation.
I honestly think at the end of the day, and I've said this before, the changes that you guys are making are all great and customer friendly, and I think everyone appreciates that. I don't think the problem is the codes themselves or how it's handled. I think it's delivery. It's the, whether real or not, that other places are using partnership. They feel like it's us against them. I don't think it's the details of like the codes or I think it's how we're delivering the message. And that's what I hear all the time. It's not in the weeds per se. It's the people in the delivery of it and the willingness to work. That's really the bigger problem, is they feel like other jurisdictions, the inspectors and the employees, the staff realize that this is an investment, this is their business, and anything we do is affecting their business, and they don't feel that same partnership with Hagerstown. And that's pretty much like I think the theme of what I hear overall.
And I'll be honest with you on that one. That's what people say to a local jurisdiction or something along those lines. They'll say this, visit other jurisdictions. They hear the same thing too. Well, it's so much easier to work with such and such jurisdiction than it is to work with your all's jurisdiction. And I go to that jurisdiction, they say, yeah, I hear it's so easy to work with that other jurisdiction. It's just the way that unfortunately, that's the game that everyone plays because they always want to have everything go better their way. They want everything to go better. It's not so much that potentially that those are easier to work with that other places are. It's just that that's the game that's played a lot of times. So we have to navigate those because we're doing it just to make sure they can move forward with their project. I understand what you're saying, and those are things that are being said out there, but that's not the reality of the thing. Reality is we're going above and beyond. We're making sure that people can move forward with their projects, the investment can continue to roll through. That's not always the case.
So I'm hearing a dichotomy here there. That's what I'm hearing you say, and what I'm hearing other people say is that all we want is for the inspector to work with us to figure out a way. You know, we've hit a roadblock here. We've got a violation. Something was done incorrectly. Now, what is the most expedient, cost-effective way to work through that quickly and get to a resolution?
That's